This episode of Eye on Research was broadcast on the 4th of February 1958.
Having got this structure, does it help us to understand the quite extraordinary things which DNA is able to do in living creatures?
And there were other factors contributing to its growing popularity. From the beginning, the double helix had appealed to artists. One painter who was quick to add it to his palette of scientific metaphors was the surrealist Salvador Dali. He called this his period of nuclear mysticism, and his use of DNA revealed a surprisingly conservative and religious aspect to his art.
Dali does pick it up in the late 50s, which is a really interesting phenomenon. The double helix appears in several of his works, where it really plays a central role. We also know that, Dali more generally was interested in science and took much of his imagination and inspiration from scientific context.
So what do you think Dali was getting at in this picture?
So the title is very difficult to remember, but I think it's desoxyribonucleic acid. So the last bit, it's the easier one. It's just the full name of DNA, desoxyribonucleic acid. And the first part is Dalasi, which is Gala, the name of his wife, and Dali, his own name, intertwined and repeated. Here is the double helix, and this somehow represents life. I think this is actually his wife, Gala, representing here, and somehow the lines combine in her. I think it indicates how he imagines himself and his wife intertwined in this sort of metaphor of life, and that also connects humans with God.
For Dali, DNA was how God influenced the human race, and he even tied it into his belief in the rightness of hereditary monarchy. DNA passed royalty through the bloodline. Dali didn't really care who was on the throne, cretin or genius, good or bad, it was all the same. The legitimacy of the DNA lineage was all that mattered.
There's a real irony here. In one sense, the double helix represents the pinnacle of scientific achievement in the modern age, the most famous event in biology since Darwin, as Jim Watson put it. On the other hand, Dali was not the only one to see in DNA a conservatism, an attachment to the past, a sense that we can never be truly revolutionary and make a clean break with history.
If everything was determined by our genes, could anything human be genuinely new? This debate grew in intensity as the science of genetics developed. By the 1990s, scientists were discussing how the human genome could be profiled, the function of each gene identified, and the press started to debate the real implications of the double helix. Was it all good? Would the mapping of the human genome set us free to conquer disease and disability? Or would it prove to be the final confirmation, as Dali had suggested, that everything about us was predestined? Some writers feared that genetics was becoming a new religion, and in two ways.
Like religion, DNA had strict, immutable laws. Were we all predetermined by our DNA? Did that mean that free will no longer existed? And secondly, if DNA could be manipulated to alter or even create a human being, did that mean the double helix was making scientists into gods?
For the writers and artists addressing these questions, the double helix was no longer simply a scientific discovery. It was a metaphor for all human life. An artist who has attempted to visualize these debates for the covers of science magazines is Bill Sanderson. He was asked to illustrate extremely problematic ethical issues. What Bill realized was that there was a striking similarity between the questions DNA raised and ideas explored in the world's classical and religious myths. Perhaps the new dilemmas were, in reality, age-old.
You could use biblical myth and you could use classical myth because they were quite consonant. It actually chimed. The scientists were discussing how much our actions, how much our lives were controlled by this code. So there was one particular one of Moses, I remember, with the two tablets on which are engraved the double helix symbols. So in the way that the two tablets that Moses brought down were a prescription for existence, then the double helix was prescribing what we were as human beings. There was this element of extra knowledge that was coming to us, that was being imparted to us, that we were digging out for ourselves. In the story of the Garden of Eden is, of course, that with that extra knowledge, we are evicted, as it were, from our innocence. I knew that people would understand the imagery, you know, that the apple of knowledge being proffered by the snake, and what that knowledge does to Adam and Eve. Knowledge gave them the freedom to be human. They could then leave this place of no forward progress, as it were, and go out and suffer, of course, but I mean also that they would investigate.
The wider circulation of the double helix means that it is now a familiar image. People don't necessarily attach a meaning to it, but they see its appeal. And that's made it ripe for commercial exploitation.
I'm not sure what Odile Crick would have made of all of these. Seems like today the double helix can be made into absolutely anything. Here we've got a perfume with a double helix winding down, unsurprisingly called DNA. We've got a lovely tie with a double helix spiralling down the tie. And your dog can even chew on the meaning of life. But my favourite has to be this blow-up double helix. So let's see whether this one spirals the right way.
So, is there a problem when an image of historical importance to science becomes so divorced from its original setting that no one knows what it really is, or what it stands for? Voila! There's nothing that can be done about it, if there is. The double helix is an attractive, marketable shape. And what's wrong with that?
The issue for me is whether the global transformation and commercialization of the double helix has led to confusion. Does it any longer help people to understand how DNA works? Or has its meaning got lost in a wealth of other interpretations that see it not as a symbol of scientific process, but something much vaguer: life, continuity, or essence?
In 2004, advertising took up the double helix and made it the central idea in a campaign for a German car maker. DNA became a metaphor for intrinsic excellence, and it was explored in various forms. One poster featured a double helix with the letters of the slogan "Vorsprung durch Technik" spiralling round in the same way as the lettered bases of the double helix itself. The idea was thought up by Sir John Hegarty and his team. They'd been partly inspired by the 50th anniversary of the discovery of DNA and Odile Crick's diagram of it in Nature magazine.
Every brand, whatever brand you're working on, always has at its heart the kind of DNA. What is it that makes it buzz? What is it that makes it happen? And in a sense, Vorsprung durch Technik is a mystery. And therefore it has a sort of magic around it. Obviously, this is the DNA of the brand, what represents DNA is the double helix. Wouldn't it be wonderful and sort of witty and amusing if we had a group of people trying to extract the DNA out of the car to try and identify what it is that makes this car wonderful? And of course they do, they analyse it, they put it on a piece of film, they look at it, and suddenly it just spells out Vorsprung durch Technik. And I think it's always interesting, actually, when you look at art and science, how, you know, you try and visualise an idea, a thought, and trying to visualise DNA as the double helix is quite intriguing, and we were really hijacking that. When you're communicating a great idea, there's always a slight gap where you're trying to get people to fill in the difference. And that's when they connect with it, that's when they have an empathy with the thought, and then it comes alive in their brain. Well, you intrigue people. And I think that's what the double helix does, is you look at it and you begin to get it. You sort of understand it, this complex structure. This is what it means.
Do you think that it's becoming a little bit overused now as a symbol of representing, you know, the essence of something? Or?
I don't think so. I think it has such power, it has such meaning. It explains in a way so much. It tries to visualize what it's about, that it has a profundity that remains with us. In a way, you can never tire of it.
The double helix has travelled a long way from the diagram Odile Crick drew in April 1953. Then it was an answer to a scientific question. What does the DNA molecule look like? But now her image is so ubiquitous, it appears that it can mean whatever you want it to mean. Salvador Dali thought it could represent everything he believed about politics and religion. But the double helix has gone beyond art and into consumer products, like neckties and perfume, and it's become part of the language of worldwide advertising. It is, in a sense, everywhere.
What I've concluded from this vast array of uses, and sometimes abuses, is that that image that Watson and Crick came up with is so beautiful, so potent, so enduring, that people have come to love it the world over. Like any great piece of art, it almost defies description, gathers meanings and interpretations it never originally had. But its great claim to fame is as a scientific image, not an artistic one. Because against all the odds, it helped us to decipher the incredibly complex science of DNA in one stunning and unforgettable image.